Yeah, that's about right. It's good.
I'll go and get some.
Go and get Bella.
But yeah.
Oh. Now, there we go. Are we ready? Hi, everyone, and a happy Easter to you all. Before I start today, I'd like to introduce you to a new member of our family. My daughter has just become the proud owner of a toy poodle called Bella, and here she is, her first experience of the internet. I'm hoping that she's going to enjoy music. She could become Bella, the busker's friend. We'll see. But in the meantime, be sure my daughter will be posting images of Bella all over the internet. So see her grow. There's Bella for you. Bye-bye, Bella. So, hi everyone, and happy Easter to you all, and welcome to another session of literary busking. Today I'm going to read you a short story about Easter. As a teacher, I always derived a great deal of pleasure from telling stories, and for me, history was always essentially a story well told. At the same time, however, I also enjoyed reading fiction to my pupils, usually as a kind of end-of-term treat. In this day and age, it seems amazing that secondary school children of all ages could once have sat before me and listened attentively as I read to them. But so it was, like some grown-up version of Listen with Mother. And when they were all sitting comfortably, I would begin. Some of the stories that I read had a seasonal flavor, such as Arthur C. Clarke's thought-provoking study of Christmas in The Star. And the one I'm going to read today does a similar thing for Easter. It's a sci-fi story that I first came across in December 1974 in a copy of the Sunday Times. And here's that very copy. Do I not throw anything away, you ask? The story is written by Gary Kilworth, and it's called Let's Go to Golgotha. I hope that you find it interesting. So now, if you are all sitting comfortably, I'll begin. The Time Travel Agency was the third room along one of the branches of a banyan building. It was a long way up, and it took Simon Falk a considerable time to reach the pink glass doors. Outside, a notice read, Pan Package Tours offers you the remarkable. This is your chance to see the Battle of Marathon, the Wars of the Roses, the first manned space flight. Absolutely no personal risk. Simon stared into the interior and then went, reluctantly it seemed, inside. An assistant slid silently to his side the moment he was in the room. Can I help you, sir? Just some brochures, please, replied Simon. Can I take some away with me to study at leisure? Certainly, sir, replied the assistant as he began deftly plucking multicolored sheets of paper from the display shelves. Let me see now. The coronation of Elizabeth I is fully booked, I'm afraid, and the revolution of Mars has only a limited number of seats available. Oh, I don't believe we're too interested in either of those events, said Simon. Is this your first time, sir? Yes, as a matter of fact, it is. Then may I recommend the sacking of Carthage? We mingle with the camp followers on a neighbouring slope. However, I should add that it's not for the squeamish. Simon asked, Isn't that a little dangerous? Oh, dear me, no, not as long as you follow our instructions. And the agent wagged a finger playfully. We've never lost a customer yet. Simon murmured his thanks and almost ran out of the room. He hated these pre-holiday arrangements, but he did owe his family a vacation, and it had to be one of these time tours. He could not afford space travel. There was nothing else to do. Earth was a solid mass of brick and concrete, and ocean cruises made his children sick. Mandy was waiting at the door of their flat, eager with anticipation. Did you get the brochures, dear? Yes, I got them, replied Simon with a resigned sigh. She grabbed them from him. Oh, wonderful. Let me see them. Oh, don't look so depressed, dear. You know you always enjoy it once we get away. A trip through time. She clutched the brochures to her breast. I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. Well, I hope it will be up to your expectations, said Simon dryly. It's certainly going to cost us enough, and my business is not doing as well as it should. Oh, nonsense, replied Mandy. A holiday will do you good. You'll come back full of fresh ideas and thoroughly relaxed. She turned over some of the brochures in her hands. Now, we don't want anything too violent. It might upset the children. Simon gave a snort. The children would wallow in it. James likes nothing better than the sight of blood, and Julie would rather see a space war picture than a live ballet performance. Oh, don't be cynical, dear. Anyway, that's all the more reason to get them away, protested Mandy. They have nothing else to do but play on the rooftops these days. Nothing else to do, Simon cried. Did I have underground free play fairgrounds when I was a boy? Did you have... Oh, don't start that again. When will you understand that children cannot appreciate what they have always had? Let them see how children lived in other ages, other countries. Mandy paused. Then she continued, We should have shown them before. Perhaps we should take them to Sparta. Did you know that the children of Sparta were placed in military academies at the age of 8 and told to steal their food or starve? The crime was getting caught. I wonder what our children would think of that boy who let a fox gnaw his abdomen rather than let his elders discover that he had stolen it and had hidden it up his smock. Her blue eyes searched Simon's face for signs of agreement. They'd probably think he was a damn fool, and so do I, Simon replied. Mandy tried again. But perhaps we should take them to Rome or Pompeii the day before it erupted and leave them there, said Simon. Don't be nasty, dear. What about the Holy Land? At the time of the Crusades, please, finished 12-year-old James, who had just entered the kitchen eating. Not before your dinner, James, complained his mother. Your father and I will decide where we are going. Now go and wash your hands. That evening, Simon and Mandy Falk sat at the table, poring over brochures and fighting over prices, places, and dates, until the front door sang softly, telling them that their closest friends were waiting to enter the house. Simon pressed the switch, and shortly afterwards, Harry and Sarah Talbot entered the room. "Hello, hello, hello, holiday time again," chirped Harry, unzipping his outwear suit. Simon smiled and scratched his nose. "Yep, but we can't decide where to go. Or should I say, when to go? It's all a bit confusing." "If you're talking about time tours, why don't you come with us? We are going to see the crucifixion," said Sarah, with a little flick of her head. "The what?" cried the Fawkes together. "The crucifixion of Christ," said Harry nonchalantly. Then he became earnest. "You see, we thought the children needed to see exactly what happened so that they had a real understanding of religion and what it means. You know what children are like. If they could see exactly how Jesus died to save us, or our souls, or whatever it was that he saved, it might have a profound effect on them. At least we hope it will." Mandy said, "Do you know, that is exactly what I was thinking before you came over. Wasn't I, Simon?" "You've not mentioned going to church in 10 years, scoffed Simon. Mandy dismissed this remark with a flick of her hand. That's not important," she retorted. "A pack of old men droning from the scriptures is not religion. I want to see the real thing. I think we should go, Simon." And so it was decided by Mandy and Sarah. Simon, his family, and their friends were going to see the crucifixion, at modest package tour prices, of course. Pan Time Tours Limited had its offices in Southend High Square. The Fawkes and the Talbots shared a floater to the pre-tour lecture to economize on the fare. They reached the small lecture hall and took seats inside. Simon looked around him. "There's quite a few people here," he whispered to Harry. "Do you think they're all on our tour?" "Must be," said Harry. "There's no other lecture booked for today." "Can I have your attention, please?" A young, serious-looking clergyman stood on the small rostrum before them. The murmuring died down. The vicar was a short man with old-fashioned glass spectacles. It was an affectation of the clergy. His glasses flashed like metal discs in the sunlight, but fell in stripes down the east side of the hall. "First of all, welcome to Pan Time Tours. I am one of your preparation officers, and I am here to give you advice on what to expect and how to conduct yourselves. We do not lay down any rules, but it is important that you should know how to act, because on this tour, as on many others, you will be mixing with the locals. You must be inconspicuous. This is the primary rule." One or two hands shot up, but the vicar waved them down. "Now, I know that a lot of you will have questions, but I must ask you to be patient. We will give you time at the termination of the lecture to get your queries answered. Many of them will probably be dealt with as the lecture continues. Remember, we have done all this many, many times before." He looked up and smiled. You will all be issued with the appropriate clothing before you embark, and everyone will go through our treatment room to ensure that their outward appearance does not clash with that of the natives. This is a perfectly harmless process and is easily reversible on return from your holiday. A few days before the trip, you will all be invited to visit our language laboratory, where you will be taught Hebrew by the knowledge injection principle in the course of one afternoon. As you probably know, the knowledge will only last about a month before it disappears completely from your brains. "Can I be a Roman soldier?" a spotty-faced youth shouted out from behind Simon. The clergyman reproved the caller with a stern look and said gravely, "Sir, I did warn you not to ask questions until the end. You will be given ample opportunity then. However, I will give you a reply because I was shortly coming to the importance of us being Hebrews. The tour needs to stay together. A Roman soldier or two tagging along behind civilians would not look right. And besides, occupation troops might have commitments. They might be recalled to barracks at short notice. You might be stopped for dirty buttons or something. No, a soldier is too vulnerable. Apart from all this, soldiers act in a particular fashion and have gestures and phrases peculiar to their profession. We would be sure to give ourselves away. No, take it from me. We need to go as civilians. "I don't want to be a Jew," muttered James. Simon nudged him to be quiet. The speaker continued. "Now, this last part is most important, and I shall understand if any of you wish to drop out. If you do, only at this juncture, mind you, your deposit money will be refunded. If any of you are thrown in prison for any reason, we might not be able to get you out in time." This provoked a loud shuffling of feet and a muttering of voices from his audience. He waited with bowed head until it had ceased. "There is no risk," he continued, "providing that you do exactly as you are told. I cannot stress the importance of this too much. You know what happened and how it happened. We will arrive on the day that Pilate asks the inhabitants of Jerusalem whom he should set free, as the citizens are permitted to grant amnesty to one prisoner over the feast of the Passover. When the crowd begins to shout, 'Barabbas,' as we know it must, then you must shout it too. You must not appear to be different in any way from the rest of the citizens. This is vitally important. You have to appear to be in agreement with the rest of the crowd. You must jeer at Christ and shake your fist at him as he drags the cross through the streets. You must remember that communities in those days were not very large, and if a small section of the people is silent, then the others will begin to wonder why and will question you. You will be sure to give yourselves away under stress." People in those days were simple. They followed their leaders, and they will regard anyone who does not with great suspicion. So, do as I say, and everyone will be perfectly safe. It may be distasteful and even repugnant to your nature, but it is a necessity. When they nail up the sign, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," you must laugh. Those that remain awestruck while the rest of the crowd are dancing and prancing, screaming and shouting, will only draw attention to themselves by their silence. I repeat, it is for your own safety. Now, are there any questions? The sermon was at an end. Only 2 childless couples asked for a refund of their deposit. "How could they do that?" asked Julie for about the 5th time, just before they left for Jerusalem. "How could they crucify him? His own people, the same people that cheered and threw palm leaves before his feet such a short time before. It's like giving someone a ticker tape parade and then hanging them. Well, I don't suppose that's unknown either, replied Simon. The children, after their initial reluctance to enjoy the pre-holiday plans, had settled down to the idea and had been studying their Bibles. Don't forget what the man said, continued Simon. They were very simple people. Yes, Simon was pleased with Julie. She was going with the right objectives in mind, to study the people who had executed Christ and to attempt to analyze their motives. Julie went on, I can't believe they had to do it. I know Christ had to die to save us all from sin, but it was mankind that was to blame, explained Simon. You must think in general terms. You can't blame individual nations like the Romans or the Jews. Well, I still think it's terrible the way they treated him. The treatment room, as promised, was painless, and the journey itself was almost a delight. It left one feeling a slightly dizzy feeling, but if you kept your eyes closed, the sensation was like that of sliding down a seemingly endless helter-skelter. There really was nothing to it. When Simon opened his eyes, he found himself sitting on warm sand beside a narrow goat track. The others were in the positions they had held inside the time room. They all climbed to their feet and made their way along the goat track towards the town that shimmered in the distance in the heat. The sun pressed hot on the back of their necks, and Simon put an arm around James to stop him from stumbling. None of them was used to walking on uneven ground covered in sharp stones, and Simon felt sorry for some of the older members of the party. The courier entered the town first. He was recognizable by his matted hair, rags, and an ancient staff he carried. But no one was to speak to him except in dire emergency. The walk was a long one, and the rough smocks were uncomfortable. Several children were beginning to complain of the heat and that their skins were sore where the cloth was rubbing. But there was a general atmosphere of excitement pervading the adults. At least we look authentic enough, thought Simon. The smocks and the sandals were certainly genuine, bought on previous trips by a tour preparation officer. A dog ran in and out of their legs, barking as they trailed down a narrow, dusty street. Their first meeting with one of the locals, thought Simon. He glanced at Mandy. Her new brown eyes flashed at him, and she looked very beautiful in a gypsy-ish sort of way. Glad you came, she whispered in Hebrew. I don't know yet, said Simon in all seriousness. Finally, they passed between some hard mud dwellings and out into a square in the middle of the town. Just in time, said the courier. Now, spread out, everyone. The mob was dense, but Harry managed to secure a clear place just inside the periphery of the crowd. A tall, thin man with an intelligent face was addressing the people from the steps of a stone building. He looked harassed and a little ill. He was speaking in Latin. What is he saying? Whispered Simon to Harry, who had studied the classics in his youth. He's asking us to choose the one to go free, replied Harry. You know, you've read the book. The crowd shuffled, but remained silent. A fly settled on the end of Simon's perspiring nose, and he flicked it away impatiently. God, it was hot, he thought. The Roman repeated his previous sentence. Suddenly, as if he had just comprehended the question, James cried out at the top of his voice, "Barabbas!" He had been daydreaming, and the question, as did many questions in Latin in the classroom of his school, had caught him off guard. The sound of his voice echoed over the hard-baked square, and James looked a little frightened by his own outburst. But then the muttering in the crowd began, and soon everyone was yelling, "Barabbas! Barabbas!" Simon felt relieved that the shouting had started. He had been startled by his son's yell and was afraid that attention had been drawn to them. But no one was looking at them now. "What did you do that for?" he hissed under the uproar of the crowd. James was nervous and very tense. I'm sorry. I thought we were supposed to. He asked us, and the man told us. I really don't know." "Never mind," interrupted Harry. "It would have happened anyway. You just jumped the gun. That's all. But don't do it again, or we may all be in trouble." James looked miserable, but Simon let it go at that. There was no sense in causing a scene, and what was done was done. They stood for about an hour in the square, with none of them quite sure what was happening. Then Julie said that she felt sick. Simon and Mandy took her behind one of the straw brick houses, leaving James with Harry and Sarah and their children. "It must be the heat," said Mandy after a while. "It's certainly getting at me a bit too. Couldn't we sit down somewhere in the shade?" She looked down the narrow street for somewhere to rest, but there was nothing in view. Then, having an idea, she walked over to one of the houses and looked in from the open doorway. A Hebrew family was sitting on stools in the middle of the room, with their hands clasped in front of them. The old man of the group raised his eyes inquiringly. It was cool in the doorway, but it was obvious to Mandy that she was intruding on something very private. "Sorry," said Mandy, and she stepped back into the street. The heat from the ground came up through the soles of her sandals again, and she walked on to the next house. It too was occupied, and so was the next, and the next. She returned to where Simon and Julie stood. "There's something funny here," she whispered to Simon when she reached him. "The houses have people in them." "So what?" said Simon in an irritated tone. "Well, you'd think that they would all be out on a day like today. Why aren't they watching Christ pulling his cross through the streets? All the other inhabitants are." "Perhaps they're, well, I don't know. What's the point anyway?" replied Simon. But then he looked thoughtful. "You know, you've got something there. Let's check a few more of the houses." And so they went from house to house, through dozens of streets, peering into doorways, looking through curtains, until they had covered a large portion of the town. Enough to know that there was something terribly wrong. The realization of what that wrong was began to sink in very rapidly, and no matter how hard Simon's mind tried to reject it or make up excuses to cover it, the awful thought remained. Julie followed her agitated parents, not understanding and obviously unwell. "I want a drink," she finally complained. Well, you can't have one, snapped Mandy. The water isn't fit to drink. It's got all sorts of germs in it. Well, these people seem to be all right, Julie sniffed to deaf ears. Simon felt a hot wave of air pass over his face. His eyes were sore, his mouth felt dry, and the dust was mixing with the sweat on his feet to form a slimy grime between his toes. But his physical discomfort was nothing compared to his mental stress. He felt very afraid. Doesn't it strike you as peculiar that the crowd was so large? He asked, wiping his brow with his sleeve at the same time. Mandy's voice was tense. Well, it has been boosted by time tours from the future, and remember that there's more than one agency. Simon was visibly trembling now. There are dozens of agencies, he cried, and all the inhabitants of this town are in their houses, praying. Quickly, we've got to find Harry and the others. Simon grabbed Julie and swung her on his back. They ran through the streets with the perspiration dripping from their eyebrows and their eyes stinging with the salt and dust. In the distance, they could hear the crowd chanting and jeering. They could hear the shrieks of laughter and high-pitched catcalls. It was an ugly, frightening sound, like the screaming of monkeys as a lion pads beneath their trees. It was the forced laughter of hyenas that circle the lion's den as the Lord lies unconcerned in the warm sun. Then suddenly, there was silence. Simon slowed, gasping for breath. He could see the rut made by the corner of the cross snaking along the street and disappearing into the distance. A shudder went through him. My God, he sobbed to his wife. We've killed him. The pair of them stumbled on, following the telltale mark in the dust until they reached the crowd. The faces were all turned in one direction and wore expressions of shocked sympathy. Simon did not dare look towards the crosses. He knew he would faint if he did. And he had seen the shadows out of the corner of his eye. That was enough. They found Harry and Sarah and the children on the edge of the crowd, as silent and as watchful as the others. Harry, choked Simon. Harry, we've got to get him down. Harry's stunned mind took time to register that Simon was with them. He could not take his eyes from the man on the center cross. Licking his lips, he replied helplessly, We can't do it, Simon. It's got to happen. You know the story. This is the way it is. But my God, I wish we'd never come. He looked at me, you know. I'll never forget his eyes as long as I live. Simon was frantic. Harry, Harry, look at the crowd. Look around you. There are no Jews here, no natives. The only ones here are us, holidaymakers from the future. Do you realize the enormity of what we've done? The whole guilt of mankind rests upon our shoulders. He was sobbing violently now. We've crucified the Son of God, and we're going to do it on the next tour and the next and the next, forever and ever, time without end. Amen. Finished Harry humbly. Well, there you are, an Easter tale. Hope you found it interesting and not too depressing. Thanks for listening. Next week, I'll be back to music, and I'm going to do a session on that great country rock group, the Eagles, who were very big back in the 1970s. Might stir a few memories with many of you. So I'll say bye-bye for now. I've introduced you to Bella, the busker's friend. Hopefully, you'll get to know her as time goes by. And I just hope she likes music. Take care. Bye for now.